Marcus Delgado thought he knew construction. 23 years swinging hammers, pouring concrete, tearing down what time had forgotten. 23 years of making the impossible possible, of moving mountains of steel and stone with nothing but determination and heavy machinery. But at 5:47 a.m. on that October morning, staring at security footage that defied everything he understood about physics and reality, Marcus realized he knew nothing at all. 12 grown men, professional demolition crew, 8 hours of documented work, and a 3-foot marble statue of the Virgin Mary that refused to disappear. The footage was crystal clear, shot from 3 different angles by the security system his company had installed the week before. At 11:30 p.m., his crew had wrapped chains around the statue's base, loaded it onto the flatbed truck, and driven away from the old San Miguel Chapel grounds. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. when the truck disappeared into the darkness, statue secured in the back. Marcus had watched it himself, standing in the doorway of the construction trailer, clipboard in hand, marking off another item from the demolition checklist. Final clearance. Completed. Before we go deeper into this mystery, take a moment to subscribe to Virgin Mary Mysteries. Stories like this are too powerful to experience alone. But here's what made Marcus's hands shake as he replayed the video for the 15th time. At 5:45 a.m., when the sunrise camera activated automatically, the statue stood exactly where it had been for 60 years. Untouched, unmarked, perfect, as if 12 professional workers had never existed. The morning light caught the marble surface, casting shadows that seemed to dance across her serene face. The base showed no signs of disturbance, no chain marks, no scratches from the steel cables, no evidence that human hands had ever touched it. The truck was found empty 3 miles away in the Walmart parking lot. No statue, no chains. No explanation. The driver, Rodriguez, swore he had felt the weight shifting in the back during transport, heard the marbles scraping against the truck bed on every turn. Tommy, his most trusted foreman for 15 years, stood beside Marcus in the trailer, coffee growing cold in his trembling hands. "Boss, I loaded that thing myself, felt the weight of it, had to be 200 pounds at least, took 4 of us just to lift it. Watched it roll away with my own eyes." Marcus fast-forwarded through the night footage frame by frame, searching for any explanation. Empty lot at midnight, empty lot at 1 a.m., empty lot at 2, 3, 4 a.m. Nothing, no movement, no shadows, no glitches in the system. Then sunrise, and there she was, the Virgin Mary, hands extended in eternal blessing, those marble eyes seeming to look directly into the camera. Directly at him. The morning fog swirled around her base like incense, and for one impossible moment, Marcus could have sworn he saw her robes flutter in the windless dawn. "We're calling Father Rodriguez," Marcus whispered, though he wasn't sure why he was whispering. The statue couldn't hear him. Could it? The statue had been watching over San Miguel Chapel for 60 years, through marriages and funerals, baptisms and last rites, through the slow exodus of families who could no longer afford the rising rents in what had once been their neighborhood. Marcus knew the history because Mrs. Esperanza Morales had made sure he knew. 83 years old, 4 feet 11 inches tall, and fierce as a desert storm, she had cornered him outside the chapel 3 months ago when the demolition contract was first announced. Her weathered hands had gripped his forearms with surprising strength as she told him about her grandfather, Antonio, who had commissioned the statue in 1963. "Imported from Carrara, Italy," she had said, her voice trembling with pride and grief. "My grandfather saved for 7 years to pay for her, 7 years of working double shifts at the steel mill. He said the Virgin Mary needed a home worthy of her grace." The community had fought the demolition for 18 months. Petitions with over 3,000 signatures, city council meetings that stretched past midnight, fundraising drives that fell just short of the astronomical sum needed to purchase the property from the diocese. In the end, Progress had won, as it always did. The chapel would be demolished to make way for a luxury apartment complex. 60 years of prayers and memories reduced to rubble and dust. Marcus had taken the contract because he needed the money. His own daughter's medical bills were drowning his family, and the payment for this job would clear their debt completely. 3 weeks of work for 6 months of peace. It had seemed like an answer to his own desperate prayers. The instructions had been specific: complete removal by sunrise on October 15th. Everything had to be cleared: pews, altar, stained glass windows, and yes, the statue. The demolition crews would arrive at 6 a.m. sharp, and the site needed to be empty. The statue was to be delivered to the diocese warehouse across town, where it would sit in storage until another parish claimed it. But Mrs. Morales had visited the construction site every evening that week, rosary beads clicking in her arthritic fingers as she knelt before the statue. "She doesn't want to leave," the old woman had told Marcus on Tuesday night. "Can you feel it? She's not ready." Marcus had dismissed it as an old woman's attachment to the past. But now, staring at the impossible footage, he remembered the weight of the statue when his crew had tried to lift it. Rodriguez was right. It had felt like moving solid lead, not carved marble. And there had been something else. Something Marcus hadn't mentioned to anyone. When they had finally gotten the chains around the base, when the truck was loaded and ready to drive away, he had looked back one last time at the empty space where the statue had stood. For just a moment, in the shadows cast by the construction lights, he could have sworn he saw the outline of a woman in blue robes, still standing there, still watching. By 7 a.m., word had spread through the construction crew like wildfire. Marcus tried to maintain control, but he could see it in their eyes. The doubt, the fear, the whispered conversations that stopped when he approached. Grown men who had demolished buildings across 3 states were suddenly afraid of a marble statue. "We're going back tonight," Marcus announced during the morning meeting. "Whatever happened was a fluke, equipment malfunction, human error. We finished the job." But Tommy shook his head. "Boss, I've been doing this for 22 years. I know what I loaded onto that truck. That statue was secured with military-grade chains. There's no way it just returned." The second attempt began at 10 p.m. sharp. This time, Marcus brought additional equipment: a hydraulic lift, more chains, and 2 extra men. 8 workers total. He also installed 3 additional cameras, positioning them to capture every angle of the removal process. The statue looked the same as always: serene marble face, hands extended in blessing, blue-painted robes that seemed to catch and hold the moonlight. But something felt different. The air around the statue seemed denser, harder to breathe. The October wind that had been howling all day suddenly went still. "All right, let's get this done," Marcus called out, but his voice sounded hollow in the unnatural silence. They positioned the hydraulic lift first. Tommy engaged the engine, and immediately sparks flew from the electrical system. The lift shuddered once and died completely. They tried the backup generator. Same result: electrical failure within seconds of approaching the statue. "Hand tools only," Marcus decided, though sweat was now beading on his forehead despite the cool night air. 8 men positioned themselves around the base. Marcus counted down from 3. They lifted together, straining with coordinated effort. Nothing. The statue might as well have been rooted to the Earth's core. Rodriguez, the strongest man on the crew, turned red with exertion. "It's like trying to lift a building," he gasped. They regrouped, adjusted their grip, tried again. This time, something gave way slightly. The statue rose perhaps an inch off its base before slamming back down with a sound like thunder. The impact sent shockwaves through the ground that Marcus felt in his bones. "Did you feel that?" whispered Carlos, the newest crew member. "Did you feel like it was fighting us?" That's when Marcus noticed their shadows. 8 men gathered around the statue, but in the light of the work lamps, there appeared to be 9 shadows. One extra shadow, slender and graceful, standing perfectly still while the others moved and shifted with their efforts. Tommy saw it too. "Boss," he said quietly, "we need to leave, now." But Marcus couldn't move. He was staring at the statue's face, and he could have sworn, impossible as it seemed, that the marble eyes had shifted, just slightly, just enough to look directly at him. The wind returned all at once, howling around them like a living thing, and then every light on the construction site went out. In the darkness, Marcus heard his men stumbling, cursing, fumbling for their phones to use as flashlights. But he stood perfectly still, because in that moment of absolute blackness, he had seen something that defied comprehension. The statue had been glowing, not bright, not like a spotlight or neon sign, but with a soft, pearl-white luminescence that seemed to emanate from within the marble itself. And in that ethereal light, Marcus had seen her face clearly, not the carved, lifeless expression he had stared at for weeks, but something alive, something aware, something that recognized him. The power came back on after exactly 60 seconds. Security cameras would later confirm the timestamp. But what those cameras captured during the third removal attempt 3 days later would challenge everything Marcus thought he knew about reality. This time, he had convinced only Rodriguez and Tommy to return. The rest of the crew had walked off the job, forfeiting their pay rather than face another night with the statue. Marcus couldn't blame them. He hadn't slept properly in 3 days. His dreams filled with voices calling his name in Spanish, voices that sounded impossibly like his mother, who had died when he was 12. If this story is pulling you in, subscribe now and tell me in the comments what you believe is really happening. Your insight might reveal something we haven't seen yet. They brought a crane this time, operated remotely from 50 feet away. The plan was simple: hook the statue, lift it, load it onto the truck and drive away without anyone getting close enough to feel whatever presence surrounded it. The crane's arm extended toward the statue. Marcus watched through the viewfinder of the remote control, Rodriguez and Tommy flanking him. The hook descended slowly, carefully, until it made contact with the chains they had secured around the statue's base during daylight hours. "Lifting now," Marcus announced. The crane engaged. The statue rose smoothly into the air, suspended 20 feet above its base, spinning slowly in the autumn wind. For a moment, Marcus felt a surge of relief. Finally, it was working. Then Rodriguez grabbed his shoulder. "Boss," he whispered, "look." Marcus looked up from the remote control. There, in the spot where the statue had stood for 60 years, where it had just been lifted from moments ago, the Virgin Mary stood untouched. Same serene expression, same extended hands, same blue robes. Marcus looked up at the crane. The statue dangled there, solid and real, marble catching the work lights. He looked back at the base. The statue stood there too, as if it had never moved. "That's impossible," Tommy breathed. Marcus's hands were shaking so badly he could barely operate the remote control. He lowered the crane slowly, watching in horror as the suspended statue descended toward the one that shouldn't exist. As they drew closer, both statues began to emit that same pearl-white glow. The moment they touched, there was a flash of light bright enough to turn night to day. When Marcus's vision cleared, only one statue remained, standing exactly where it had always stood, as if mocking their efforts. That night, for the first time in 25 years, Marcus dreamed of his mother. The dream was always the same. His mother, Elena Delgado, standing in the kitchen of their old apartment, flour on her hands from making tortillas, but her eyes filled with tears. "Marcus, mijito," she would say, "I'm sorry. We should have kept the promise. We should have told you about your great-grandmother's words." Marcus would wake up with his heart pounding, the scent of fresh tortillas lingering impossibly in his bedroom, and his mother's voice echoing in his ears. We should have kept the promise. After 3 failed attempts to move the statue, after losing half his crew, after watching the impossible become routine, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He drove to his father's house at 6 a.m. on Saturday morning, still wearing yesterday's work clothes, still smelling of fear and concrete dust. Roberto Delgado was 74 years old and had never spoken much about the past. But when Marcus knocked on his door that morning, his father took one look at his face and said, "You've seen her, haven't you? La Virgen at San Miguel." Marcus felt the world tilt. "You know about the statue? Sit down, son. There's something I should have told you years ago." Indeed, what Roberto revealed in the next 20 minutes shattered everything Marcus thought he knew about his family. His great-grandmother, Isabella Delgado, had been one of the original founders of San Miguel Chapel in 1963. She had worked alongside Mrs. Morales' grandfather to commission the statue, contributing her life savings and something more precious, a solemn vow. She promised the Virgin Mary that our family would always protect her, Roberto explained, his weathered hands trembling as he poured coffee. Isabella said that as long as a Delgado lived in this city, the Virgin would have a guardian. When Isabella died, the responsibility passed to my mother, then to me, and it should have passed to you. Marcus stared at his father. "You never told me. Your mother and I, after she died, after we lost so much, I thought it was just old superstition. I thought it was better to let it die with me." Roberto's voice cracked. "But La Virgen, she doesn't forget. Family promises run deeper than blood." The weight of 60 years of broken promises settled on Marcus's shoulders like chains. Every night he had tried to remove the statue. He had been working against his own family's sacred word. Every failure, every strange occurrence, it wasn't the statue fighting him. It was his great-grandmother's spirit calling him home. "What am I supposed to do?" Marcus whispered. Roberto gripped his son's hand. "What Isabella would have done, what I should have done. You honor the promise, or you lose everything that matters." Marcus drove back to the construction site as the sun was setting, his mind reeling with revelation and responsibility. The demolition was scheduled for Monday morning, less than 36 hours away. He had a choice: complete the contract that would save his daughter's medical debt, or honor a promise made by a woman he had never met. As he parked outside the chapel, Marcus saw Mrs. Morales kneeling before the statue, her rosary beads catching the last light of day. She looked up as he approached, and her ancient eyes held something he hadn't expected: forgiveness. Mrs. Morales rose slowly from her knees, her ancient joints protesting the movement. In the fading light, she looked smaller than Marcus remembered, but her eyes held depths that seemed to contain decades of secrets. "She told you, didn't she?" Mrs. Morales said softly. "La Virgen, she called you back to honor what was broken." Marcus nodded, unable to speak. The weight of his family's broken promise sat heavy in his chest. "Come with me, mijo. There's something you need to see." Mrs. Morales led him to the small office building behind the chapel that had served as the parish record center for 60 years. From her purse, she produced a key worn smooth by decades of handling. "I've been the unofficial keeper of memories since my husband died," she explained, unlocking the door. Someone had to remember what the church forgot. Inside, filing cabinets lined every wall, but Mrs. Morales went straight to a locked cabinet in the corner, producing another key from a chain around her neck. "These are the records the diocese wanted destroyed when they sold the property," she said, pulling out a thick manila folder. "I saved them. God told me to save them." The folder contained documents that made Marcus's hands shake. Construction permits from 1963, signed by both Antonio Morales and Isabella Delgado, a letter from the Carrara quarry in Italy, and then a document that stopped Marcus's heart completely. A blessing certificate from the Vatican, confirming that the statue had been consecrated with soil from Fatima, Portugal, the site where 3 children witnessed apparitions of the Virgin Mary in 1917. The blessing was dated August 15th, 1963, the Feast of the Assumption. But it was the final document that shattered everything Marcus thought he knew. A handwritten letter in faded Spanish from his great-grandmother Isabella to the parish priest. Father Miguel, I have made a sacred vow to Our Lady that my family will guard her statue until the end of time. Should any Delgado betray this promise, may we suffer the consequences until the debt is repaid. Let this be recorded as a covenant between heaven and earth. The letter was dated 3 days before Isabella's sudden death from a heart attack. Your great-grandmother didn't just help commission this statue, Mrs. Morales whispered. She bound your bloodline to it, with soil from Fatima, with a Vatican blessing, with her dying breath. Marcus stared at the documents, understanding flooding through him like ice water. The statue hadn't just been resistant to removal, it had been impossible. Not because of supernatural intervention, but because removing it would break a sacred covenant, blessed by the church itself. How many times has someone tried to move it? Marcus asked. Mrs. Morales smiled sadly. 17 times in 60 years. Never once successful. Men have lost their jobs, their businesses, their families trying to break what Isabella made unbreakable. Marcus felt pieces clicking into place. His parents' financial struggles, his mother's early death, his daughter's mysterious illness that had started the exact month he signed the demolition contract. The Delgado family hadn't just forgotten a promise. They had been paying for breaking it their entire lives. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table until 3 a.m., staring at photocopies of the documents Mrs. Morales had shared, trying to understand how a promise made 60 years ago could still hold such power over his life. His daughter Sophia slept in the next room, her breathing labored by the mysterious respiratory condition that had appeared 3 months ago. The medical bills sat beside his coffee cup. $127 in debt that the demolition contract would eliminate completely. But now he understood the true cost of that money. At 5 a.m., Marcus made the call that would change everything. He dialed Pinnacle Development, the company funding the luxury apartment project. This is Marcus Delgado from Delgado Construction. I need to speak with Mr. Richardson immediately. 20 minutes later, Marcus was explaining to an incredulous project manager that the demolition contract was void, that the statue couldn't be removed, that the entire project would need to be redesigned around a 3-foot marble figure or abandoned completely. You're telling me you can't move one statue? Richardson's voice crackled through the phone. Delgado, you'll lose everything. Your company, your reputation, your family's future. I'll see to it personally. Marcus closed his eyes, seeing his great-grandmother Isabella in his mind, a woman he had never met, but whose determination lived in his blood. Some things are more important than money. The call ended with threats of lawsuits and financial ruin. By 7 a.m., word had spread through the construction community. Marcus Delgado had lost his mind, thrown away the biggest contract of his career over a statue. By noon, his crew had gathered at the construction site, not to work, but to witness what they believed would be their boss's complete breakdown. Tommy, Rodriguez, Carlos, and even the men who had walked off the job stood in a semicircle around the statue, watching Marcus kneel where his great-grandmother had once knelt. "Boss," Tommy said gently, "you don't have to do this. We can find another way." But Marcus wasn't listening to Tommy. He was listening to something else, a voice carried on the autumn wind, speaking Spanish words he somehow understood despite never learning the language fluently. Mijo, honor what was broken, heal what was wounded, restore what was lost. The voice belonged to his mother, but underneath it, Marcus heard something older, stronger, the voice of Isabella Delgado, calling across 6 decades of silence. Marcus placed his hands on the statue's base, not to lift it, but to honor it. The marble felt warm beneath his palms, impossibly warm for an October morning. As he knelt there, surrounded by his confused crew, something extraordinary happened. The statue began to glow again, but this time the light was different. Not the pearl-white luminescence of resistance, but a golden radiance that seemed to heal rather than warn. The light spread from the marble to Marcus's hands, up his arms, filling him with peace he hadn't felt since childhood. When he stood and turned to face his crew, tears streamed down his face, but he was smiling. "The job's not cancelled," Marcus announced. "It's just changed." His crew stared in confusion as Marcus pulled out his phone and made another call, this time to the Historical Preservation Society. Behind him, the statue continued to glow, and Marcus swore he could hear 2 generations of women laughing with joy. The call to the Historical Preservation Society changed everything, but not in the way Marcus had expected. Within hours, Dr. Elena Vasquez from the State Historical Commission was on site with specialists. What they discovered around the statue's base would rewrite 60 years of Denver's religious history. "Mr. Delgado," Dr. Vasquez said, examining soil samples, "this isn't just consecrated ground. According to our tests, the soil composition contains elements that shouldn't exist in Colorado. The team brought ground-penetrating radar, expecting to find standard concrete foundation. Instead, they found something that made them call in archaeologists from the University of Denver. Buried beneath the statue, exactly 6 feet down, lay a perfectly preserved time capsule made of lead and sealed with wax bearing the Vatican's official seal. Inside were documents that Mrs. Morales had never seen, written in Isabella Delgado's hand, but also signed by Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, the future Pope Benedict XVI, during his visit to Denver in 1963. But what happened to Marcus's daughter convinced everyone that something beyond human understanding was at work. Sophia's respiratory condition, which had baffled doctors for 3 months, disappeared completely the morning Marcus honored his family's promise. She woke up breathing clearly for the first time since the mysterious illness began. Her oxygen levels normal, her lungs completely clear on X-rays taken that afternoon. The doctors had no explanation. The timing was impossible to ignore. Word reached the Vatican within 48 hours. By week's end, a delegation of church historians was flying to Denver to examine the documents and investigate what they termed potential miraculous intervention. Pinnacle Development found themselves in an impossible position. Their luxury apartment project was indefinitely halted while the site underwent historical review. Richardson's threatened legal battles never materialized. No court would rule against a site under Vatican investigation, but the most profound change was in the statue itself. Ever since Marcus had placed his hands on its base in surrender rather than attempted removal, something fundamental had shifted. The statue no longer resisted human touch. The marble was warm, even in cool October evenings. And the eyes, every person who visited swore the eyes were different now. Not carved, lifeless marble, but something alive, aware, infinitely compassionate. People began coming from across the city to pray before the statue. Not because of newspaper articles or Vatican investigation, but because of something they felt when they approached it. A peace that transcended understanding. Marcus stood watching families gather around the statue as the sun set. His crew had spent the week building a proper pathway and installing benches, turning the demolition site into an impromptu shrine. Tommy approached, hard hat in hand. "Boss, how did you know?" Marcus looked at the statue, thinking of his great-grandmother Isabella, of 60 years of broken promises finally made whole. "I didn't know anything," Marcus said quietly. "I just remembered that some things are worth protecting, even when we don't understand why." As he spoke, the statue began its evening glow, gentle, golden, welcoming. And Marcus finally understood that he hadn't saved the statue at all. It had saved him. 6 months later, the San Miguel Chapel grounds looked nothing like the luxury apartment complex that had been planned, and nothing like the demolition site it had once been. The Vatican investigation had concluded in February with a formal declaration of miraculous intervention, making the site officially recognized as a place of pilgrimage. The statue, now known as Our Lady of the Sacred Promise, drew visitors from across the Americas. Marcus's transformation ran deeper than the physical changes. His construction company, Delgado Heritage Restoration, now specialized in preserving historical and religious sites. The skills he had learned tearing down buildings had become invaluable for saving them. The Vatican contract alone had earned him more money than the original demolition would have. Sophia, now 8 years old and completely healthy, played in the memorial garden built around the statue. She showed no memory of her mysterious illness, but sometimes Marcus caught her talking quietly to the statue, just as Mrs. Morales had done for decades. "What do you tell her?" Marcus had asked his daughter one evening. "I don't tell her anything, Papa," Sophia replied with childhood wisdom. "I listen." Mrs. Morales had lived to see the Vatican's declaration, passing peacefully 2 weeks after the announcement. Her final words, according to her granddaughter, were, "Isabella, we kept the promise." The old woman had left the chapel records to Marcus, along with a letter written months before her death. "Marcus, you were never meant to move the statue. You were meant to understand that some promises transcend generations. Your great-grandmother bound your family to something sacred, not as a burden, but as a blessing. The statue didn't need your protection, you needed its purpose." Reading those words, Marcus finally understood what his father had been too afraid to tell him. The Delgado family hadn't been cursed by a broken promise. They had been blessed with a sacred responsibility that had waited 60 years for someone brave enough to embrace it. The financial problems that had plagued his family for generations had vanished. Not just his own medical debt, but the pattern of struggle that had followed the Delgado name since Isabella's death. His father's arthritis had inexplicably improved. His cousin Miguel had found sobriety after visiting the statue. It was as if honoring the promise had unlocked blessings waiting in spiritual escrow for 6 decades. Every evening at sunset, Marcus walked to the statue and placed his hand on the warm marble base, not out of obligation, but out of gratitude. Sometimes he brought his father, who would tell him stories about Isabella that Roberto was finally ready to share. "She used to say that God gives every family a way to serve," Roberto explained one evening. "Our family serves through remembering, through keeping sacred things safe." As spring turned toward summer, Marcus began to notice something new. The statue's evening glow was growing brighter each day, as if building towards something. Mrs. Morales's granddaughter had mentioned that Isabella's journal contained prophecies about the statue's future, words written in 1963 about events yet to come. But those prophecies, Marcus was beginning to suspect, were about more than just his family's promise. They were about what would happen when other families, other bloodlines, other sacred promises began to awaken across the world. Today, 3 years after that October morning, when Marcus first saw impossible footage of a statue that refused to disappear, Our Lady of the Sacred Promise stands exactly where she has always stood, but she no longer stands alone. The shrine that grew around her has become something unprecedented in modern religious history. Pilgrims arrive daily from 6 continents, drawn not by marketing or media coverage, but by dreams. The same dream, reported by thousands. A woman in blue robes, standing in a garden of roses, calling them by name. Marcus has documented over 400 families who have discovered, after visiting the statue, that they too carry forgotten spiritual obligations. Sacred promises made by grandparents and great-grandparents, lost to time but not to heaven. Italian families remembering pledges to maintain roadside shrines. Irish descendants recalling oaths to protect ancient holy wells. Mexican lineages awakening to commitments made to border sanctuary sites. The phenomenon has a name now, hereditary sacred obligation syndrome, coined by Dr. Vasquez. The Vatican has established a special commission to investigate what they're calling the Great Remembering, a worldwide spiritual awakening that began with one impossible statue in Denver. But for Marcus, the most profound change isn't in the crowds or fame. It's in the evening conversations he has with Sophia, now 11 years old and somehow wise beyond her years. "Papa," she had said last Tuesday as they walked home from their daily visit, "why do you think Bisabuela Isabella chose our family for this?" Marcus had considered the question, watching the statue's golden glow begin to warm the twilight sky. "I think she didn't choose us, mija. I think she chose love. She loved the Virgin Mary so much that she was willing to bind her entire family to that love forever." Sophia had nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "And now we get to help other families remember their love too." That evening, as Marcus performed his nightly ritual of placing his hand on the statue's warm base, he realized something that made him smile in the gathering darkness. He had spent so much time thinking about the promise his great-grandmother had made. He had never considered that Isabella might have known exactly what she was doing. That binding the Delgado bloodline to the Virgin Mary wasn't just about protecting a statue. It was about creating a beacon that would one day call other forgotten promises home. The statue's glow intensified, and for a moment Marcus could have sworn he saw two figures standing beside the marble Virgin. Isabella Delgado, young and determined, and Mrs. Morales, smiling with the satisfaction of a promise finally fulfilled. Tomorrow another family would arrive, drawn by dreams they couldn't understand. Tomorrow another bloodline would remember what they had forgotten. Tomorrow the great awakening would continue. But tonight, Marcus Delgado stood in gratitude before the statue his family was meant to protect, finally understanding that some promises are too powerful to break. They can only lie dormant, waiting for the right heart to honor them. The Virgin Mary's marble eyes seemed to meet his in the golden light, and Marcus heard, carried on the evening wind, two simple words that changed everything. "Well done." If this story moved you, subscribe to Virgin Mary Mysteries so you never miss the next chapter in these extraordinary mysteries.